Alright, well, here we go. We are back today with another fun little video. We're gonna do something a little bit different today. Not doing just a strict 5-sheet breakdown of an individual article. Today we're actually gonna be looking at a few different topics, running through them a little bit more briefly, hitting on the major misleading topics, running through how they are kind of bullshitting us around a little bit. So let's dive right into it. Starting out with what we see on the screen here, the CNN article about what Rand Paul gets wrong on vaccines. Because this in response to when Rand Paul recently said he's not going to get vaccinated because he already had COVID and he's going to rely on his own immune system. So they show this one quote, his longer quotes explained it a little further, but they just take this one quote, put it in isolation here, until they show me evidence that people who already had the infection are dying in large numbers or being hospitalized or getting very sick. I just made my own personal decision that I'm not getting vaccinated because I've already had the disease and I have natural immunity. Now, again, his original comments do give better context to it, but let's just take it at face value. Let's say, let's just run with the quote CNN provided there. What's wrong with that? He says he has natural immunity. Let's see how they come back at that. Is he right to say that he should get vaccinated? Science says no. As I think many people would know, science doesn't say anything. Science is a process. Science is not an institution, despite how much people like CNN and Chris Cillizza, the writer here, this friggin' CNN editor at large guy. Despite how much these institutionalists would like us to believe it, science is not some is not, a group of people declaring from on high what is true and what is not. Science is a process where someone thinks up an idea and then, maybe it's a friggin' thing, and then they test it, and then based off of that experimentation, they refine their idea, they test some more, they come up with new ideas, so on. Scientific method. That's what science is. Science is the scientific method. Science is not something that says yes or says no. Science is a method. So the fact that Chris Cillizza and these scumbags at CNN are saying science says no is just a huge red flag. That means they are leaning in to this, to what's historically been considered a logical fallacy, the appeal to authority. It's well known that if you take a random group of people and you have just a certain person tell them something, and then you say, how likely are you to believe it? A certain percentage of them will say yes, a certain percentage of them will say no. And then if you have a random person wearing a white lab coat with a stethoscope around his neck, have him tell him that same piece of information, a higher percentage of people will say yes than the people in the other group. It is, and it has nothing to do with whether it's right or wrong. People just have a natural subconscious reliance on authority figures. They tend to defer to police. They tend to defer to scientists. They tend to defer to doctors. And it's not because it's rational to do so, it's because of a well known subconscious bias that CNN has an interest in normalizing. This is they've part of this COVID nonsense. The way they've been covering it is not just utilizing this appeal to authority, but making it like if you don't believe that appeal to authority is the rational way to think about things, then you're a conspiracy theorist. If you need like facts and reasons and evidence to come to a conclusion, then you're a nut job. So that's when anytime someone says science says yes or science says no, that is a clear flag that they're leaning into that narrative. All right. So then, and then look at this. So next up, science says no, and then the very next line, public health guidance on this is crystal clear. Wait, are science and public health guidance the exact same thing? Well, no. Public health guidance is dictated by politicians or political appointees. Those people tend to have some kind of scientific background, but you don't get a public health position because you're the most qualified scientist in your field. You get there because a politician decided to appoint you to that position. So, saying that, implying as they do here, that public health guidance is tantamount to science is bullshit, for lack of a better word. Alright, and then let's keep going here. So this guy is an associate professor of medicine at Emory University. Holy shit, we can't criticize anything he says. This guy must have a huge white lab coat. I mean, he's an associate professor of medicine, right? But keep in mind, Rand Paul, or should I say Dr. Rand Paul, because he is an actual medical doctor. He's like an ophthalmologist or whatever. He's not just a GP, he's an actual specialist doctor, which is, a lot harder to be than just a random GP. So I don't know if Rand Paul's level of qualification gives him a bigger white lab coat than associate professor of medicine at Emory University. But either way, this whoever they're quoting as their expert here, he's not like Dr. King scientist of epidemiology, right? He's not even an expert in the field they're talking about. He's just some random professor at a university. So, whatever. And then the next thing this from the CDC. Again, more public health guidance. None of this is talking about science. Like, if when he says science says no, like, for all the reasons I said, that's bullshit. But if you were to try to translate that into actual, into something that actually meant something, it would be like, this scientific study showed this, or this meta-analysis of 100 different scientific studies shows that the trend is in this direction. Not some political appointees who deal with sciencey type stuff tell the people to do this. It's a completely different topic. Alright, so that's where they're coming from, and it's total bullshit. But let's see what these bullshitters are saying. They're saying that you should be vaccinated because we don't know exactly how long immunity lasts after infection. Right? That's what the first guy says. And the second guy says, do not yet know how long you can you're protected from getting sick after recovering from COVID-19. Well, guess what? We don't know how long the vaccines protect you from getting infected either. They're already talking about giving us booster shots for those friggin' things. So how is this any different? It's just layers and layers of bullshit obfuscation here. And then he hits the next point. Health and science aside, there's also the symbolism and messaging question. So I think this is why the CNN institutional pharmaceutical companies, whatever, all kind of the same thing. This is why they're really pissed off, is because Rand Paul is cutting against the symbolism and messaging to help them sell the most vaccine shots. Her and the way he frames it, herd immunity is the only way to return to normal, and B, the path to herd immunity runs through max vaccinations. What he doesn't include is C, and natural immunity acquired through COVID 19 infections. Right? You never see that. You see, like, oh, this percentage of the population has been vaccinated. Well, what percentage has antibodies through having been infected with COVID? Never see that. So, alright. This isn't a very long article, but it's just thick with bullshit. And it's that, it's that, yeah, I can't stand that appeal to authority narrative. I just hate it so much. And that's really what this one is focusing on. That's really what they're leaning on. Alright, let's jump over to DeSantis signing a bill, the big tech bill. Right? So this is kind of a long Washington Post article. Uh, so, first note I had on this is that it says in here that big tech, one of the criticisms people have had is that uh, people on the right have had is that the big tech is censoring in a partisan manner. They're censoring more on the right than on the left. They're favoring the left over the right, etc. And it says in here that the big tech is fervently denying that. So I'm trying to find that quote. Let's see if I can do a control F for this thing. I don't know how to spell fervently. Deny. Okay, there we go. Vehemently denying it. I'd written down the quote wrong. Uh, but I wonder exactly how we characterize that vehemently deny thing. Because one of the biggest issues with this partisan censorship was that Hunter Biden story. This was a massive, massive story right at the point in the election that it was likely to tip the scales or plausible to tip the scales, turn the election in one direction or the other. And the manner in which it was censored was one of the most insane, over the top things ever. This was where Twitter prevented people from linking to this story. It suspended New York Post's account. They were the newspaper that originally reported on it. And it would prevent people from tweeting out links to this story. And it would prevent people from even DMing each other using the private messaging stuff. Even if it wasn't a public tweet, it would prevent you from linking to the story through any mechanism using Twitter. So this was an insane, unprecedented, over the top censorship. And obviously cuts one way, right? They didn't do something like that for a story that hurt Trump. Uh and so did they vehemently deny that that was something that fervently or that censored in a partisan manner? Well, Jack Dorsey had come out and said that was a huge mistake. So I don't know. How exactly do we characterize that vehement denial? That sounds kind of like he's admitting that they did censor that in a way that they have issues with. Maybe he didn't come out and say that the huge mistake was over partisanship. Maybe he's saying like it was a huge mistake that we didn't articulate our rationale better, or whatever his denial is. If he's still denying yeah, it's not clear if he's still denying that they censored that story in a partisan manner. And if he is, it's not a vehement denial. Alright, so let's pop down to this Santa Clara law professor, Eric Goldman. So I like this guy did a good little contradictory thing here. So it's obviously unconstitutional, this here law, because it restricts the editorial discretion of online publishers. And he also says that it would be preempted by Section 230 that shields internet companies from, blah, 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 from all the stuff 230 shields companies from. Now, if you'll remember, 230 does not protect publishers. It only protects platforms. And if a platform is deemed to be a publisher, they lose Section 230 privileges. So here he's saying they get both, which is in effect what they've been having. But that is one of the main criticisms of Section 230, is that it's designed to allow companies to create like a free marketplace where if users just post whatever they want on there, then the website's not going to get sued for what the user posted. But if the company starts making editorial decisions in terms of, if they're acting like a publisher, acting like the New York Times, making editorial decisions in terms of what stories they put up there and what stories they don't, then they do not have the privileges. And here he's saying, here it's going to restrict their right to do New York Times type decisions, like what YouTube videos they're allowed to promote and what YouTube videos they're allowed to shadow ban. It's going to protect their First Amendment privileges to do that, while at the same time, it's going to, run into problems with their ability to be shielded as a neutral platform under Section 230. So that guy's really speaking out of both sides of his mouth there. That I just thought it was funny that they put both of them in the same paragraph right there. Uh, yeah, I think what's really the big story here is that nothing is gonna happen at the federal level with this big tech censorship. So we see different states starting to pick away at it. They talk about it some in here, like Texas, Washington. So hope, and I do think the constitutionality, federal preemption. There are some questions of how well these will stand up, whether or not legal challenges will be successful against these laws. So we'll see how that goes forward. But hopefully, there's something we can do to rein in these tech oligarchs, because it is insane. Like, the amount of regulatory capture that has happened, where these guys essentially own Washington at this point. Like half of Biden's staff is former Facebook and Google people. You think those people are going to turn around and decide to seriously regulate those companies that they still have this allegiance towards? I don't think so. Something tells me no. And then I like yeah, so they have the trade groups. This is basically this is the spokesperson for Facebook, Google, and Twitter. It's the vice president and general counsel for NetChoice, a trade organization whose members include those big tech companies. So he's basically speaking on their behalf. Uh, and he's just, going back to that standard canard. If we give people too much freedom, then it's going to be hard for families to safely navigate online. That is just the go-to for how you restrict people's freedoms. It won't be safe. You won't be safe unless you give me all of your freedoms. Just lie down, do nothing. You can beg a little if you like, but I'll keep you safe. So, I mean, that was just sort of classic, obvious one there. Alright, let's not spend too much time on this one, but it's interesting. Uh, Timeline, how the Wuhan lab leak theory suddenly became credible. It's another Washington Post piece. Because, yes, suddenly, I think I kind of agree with the suddenly, not in terms of became credible, but in terms of the mainstream corporate media treating this as a serious story. It has been a pretty quick turnaround. So, this was fun reading through this article. We won't go through the whole thing because it's long and there's a lot of details we won't need here. But they give Tom Cotton a lot of credit for, hitting right at the very beginning. Like, whoa, what's going on here? Like, we have this virus outbreak, this coronavirus outbreak, and it happened to be right where they're doing all this, gain of function research on coronaviruses. Should we be investigating that? And they even admit that, uh, whatever. I don't see where it is. Okay, yeah. They write this Washington Post article critical of him. That after he says that, the Washington Post writes this article. They're like, no, you monster! How dare you bring that up? There's absolutely no evidence. You're just like a racist. And any serious scientist has just proven that. And, yeah, but they give him a fair amount of credit in this reworking of it. But this story, it's just picking up more and more steam. I did a video on this recently where CNN is still acting like the lab leak thing, yeah, whatever. It's, some people are kind of talking about it. But the way they write that article, they're not openly admitting that it's a serious thing, but it really feels like they see the walls closing in, so they're not giving a full throated defense to the zoological argument. They're just, kind of softening their tone, getting their audience ready for when they turn around and be like, well, it turns out, maybe there was a lab leak. And yeah, so this was another part of that gradual decay in in that their narrative. All right, last little story. This is not not a very complicated one. Huffington Post just recycling some Russiagate stuff. What else do they have to do, right? So, if you'll remember, it's hard to keep track of all this Russiagate stuff because there's just so many fake stories that pop up. Oh my god, this is the bombshell. This definitely proves collusion and Donald Trump Jr. is going to jail and, whatever. Like every week they would have some new thing. And then you wouldn't see that headline next week. You'd be like, wait, where did that? Oh, well, I don't know. I'll probably see that later when the proof does come forward. But it's like, no, it had actually been totally debunked, and there was never any good grounds in the first place. So this was one of the last threads that those real Russiagate zealots were hanging on to was the Paul Manafort polling data thing, where he had gave some to what's the guy's name, Kislyak, some Russian guy, maybe like a spy or some Russian guy with ties to intelligence agencies, whatever. Uh, and the point of the story is just that some newly released court filings are saying that he lied in some particulars about that, about how and when he talked to whom about it. Some little process violations. Nothing really substantive there. But for people who have been following the story, they'll know that polling data was totally useless. It was all either severely out of date or it was publicly available. So, the way it's being spun by the Russiagate zealots is that he was aiding Russia in interfering in the election. But that cannot be further from the truth. Because how could you use polling data from months ago that's severely out of date, that is in no way reflects the current reality, or is already publicly available that you could just simply Google? How could that information assist your attempts to influence a foreign election? It simply couldn't. So this is another, whatever. It's been debunked 1,000 times, but they're just bringing it back up because there was some little thing that came up regarding these new court filings. Uh, so it's just kind of fun to see that people who, and they don't even have that long of an article about it. This is just put in there for the diehard Russiagate zealots. I bet 90% of them don't even remember the details. Well, I don't know. That is kind of curious. Like, I wonder how many of the people in the target demo for this article, out of the two camps, how many of them, one, never knew that it was a bullshit story, or two, uh, did know that it was a bullshit story, but have since forgotten because it's just been in the wash of the day, of the 24-hour news cycle. One of the billion other Russiagate lies that they've let sit there for a while and now they're rehashing. Alright, well, we don't need to spend too much more time on that. Uh, alright, well, I think we're about done here. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you guys next time.